It's the kind of plant you look at it and you'll think, I either like this or I hate it. Well, I don't hate it. I'm fascinated by it. It's a white-flowered Brugmansia, and the flowers are hanging there like great big fat tennis balls at the moment because they haven't quite opened up properly. If you put 2 or 3 plants together and they don't work, well, you just don't do it again, or you take them out, or whatever you do. It's a continual experiment, I suppose, which
Tell
is
me,
lovely.
can you think of a failure?
Oh dear, it's going to sound awful off the top of my head. No.
Hello and welcome to another East Ruston Old Vicarage special on Talking Dirty. This time all about the sensations of September. Over at aforementioned garden, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist in many shades of blue.
It's all because somebody told me you should wear more blue. It suits you. I don't know whether it does or not. Anyway, over in Cambridgeshire, with a sunny smile on this grey morning, we have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson. How are you doing?
I'm also in blue, flowery blue.
We got the memo.
We're like a Dulux colour chart over here.
Absolutely.
Well, I think the first thing we have to talk about, seeing as it's probably, if you're listening to this as soon as it's come out, still on iPlayer, East Ruston Old Vicarage as the star of Gardener's World a couple of weeks back when we're recording this. Fingers crossed, even if it's not on iPlayer, whenever you pick this up on YouTube or on your audio podcast platform, still kicking around somewhere, clips on YouTube, that sort of thing. What a marvellous opportunity for people who don't necessarily get to set foot in your garden on the east coast of Norfolk in the UK to just get a little insight into the glamour, the glory of all of your planting in all your garden rooms.
Well, that is it. It's absolutely true because we've had numerous people sort of either emailing or getting in touch saying how marvelous it is to actually see the garden, for especially those drone shots, because I think even people that know the garden well, they're absolutely gobsmacked by it. They're dumbfounded because they didn't realize what it looked like from the air. They didn't realize the precise geometry of it. I mean, as you move from one area to another on the flat, you're just moving from one area to another. You really have no preconceived idea of looking down like an eagle on the garden as a whole, and it does make an impact, I think. Yeah. And I have to say both as well to thank you to the whole Gardeners World team, of course, and to Arit and to Adam, because they were both very, very helpful and very nice people. Adam, I thought, was an absolute charmer, but we won't go into that.
You and Adam together on screen were particularly wonderful. It was really enjoyable. And also, I think so if you don't know, basically, the programme was anchored from East Ruston Old Vicarage. So they headed off to Wrecker Mysteries Garden. You can catch her appearance on this podcast if you wish, if you've never seen it, when she was in her allotment before she moved to her new garden in the north of England. But they headed off to other places, but the whole thing was anchored from East Ruston, and Adam and Arit gave little sort of perspectives on the planting. But there was also this fab chunk where they did propagation, or Adam came and did propagation with you, and that was one of my favourite bits.
Well, when we were talking about, I mean, people probably know me by now on this podcast of being a compulsive propagator, and that's what I do. I mean, this past week I was propagating Brugmansias because I just went looking through my Brugmansias, and I suddenly thought, I haven't got my pink one. I don't know where the pink one's gone. There are 2 yet to flower, so that I might still have it, but I don't know whether I have or not. Anyway, Lionel, gardening friend, he had heard about this, so he rushed into the garden the very next time he was here and thrust a load of wilting leaves in my hand. He said, "You better get those on the mist bench quick." And I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, there's 2 shoots of pink Brugmansia." And so, me being me, I cut them up and sliced them up and all the rest of it. And I got actually 10 cuttings from those two shoots. I looked at them last night. I haven't looked at them this morning, but I looked at them last night, and they're still turgid, which means that their leaves are full, and I only leave little tiny leaves on, and I half all the big leaves so that they don't transpire too much. But they're plump as a partridge, let's say.
I think for anyone who, and if you're listening to or watching this podcast, you probably are also propagation mad. It's the nature of the beast. But I think for anybody watching Gardener's World, they learned so much from just seeing you and Adam at work. I mean, predominantly you, and just sharing those little insights along the way. I loved it.
So it's become almost instinctive to me it's what I do. It's how I do it and all the rest
It
of it.
looks like it's just this second nature. It's like
Yeah,
breathing.
exactly it is. It is. And it's like putting my containers together. People say, well, how do you do it? I can't tell you how I do it. I can tell you it's the way I do it. And that's the way it is.
Yeah.
As simple as that. And, it suddenly became apparent to me talking to Adam that there are an awful lot of questions to be asked about the job, if you like, that I take for granted. I mean, I do thousands of cuttings a year. So, you're just going, 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 going. And there are people that are much better at it than I am, but I think I'm pretty good for an amateur.
Pretty good from your success rate, I'd say pretty good. Actually, to sort of move on to exactly what's happening at East Ruston at the moment. Obviously, always propagating, and we just always think of your propagation benches being full, but you're at that point now where you've got to sort out your greenhouses, get everything cleaned down, and that is a huge process at East Ruston.
Yeah, because when what we do is we actually empty the greenhouse, the propagating greenhouse, which is probably about 12 feet long, I suppose, by 8 feet wide, and there's benches on either side, and both benches can be heated, and both benches have mist units on them, and so you've got to clean all that down. And I mean, first of all, we empty the house, I shut it up and hope for some really hot weather and let it bake, because that gets rid of an awful lot of pests and diseases. Then we clean everything down. We have to take all the mist nozzles apart. They're all made of brass as opposed to plastic, which don't last. And so we have to clean all of those and get all the lime scale off them and everything else, put them back, reassemble them, and then hope they work. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Rather like an old motor car there. They need a little fine tuning in the engine, sometimes, shall we say. But once you're up and running, you're absolutely fine. I mean, you've got to clean everything. I mean, clean your surfaces, because that's where fungal spores are. So the matting, quite often we will use the matting from one year to another. That's the capillary matting that holds the moisture, because underneath the capillary matting, there is a heating unit. So, you've got a warm bottom. And it's like the test of an old gardener going out and say, is it ready to sow seeds yet? Well, put your bottom on the ground. If it doesn't feel cold, it's all right. You can go ahead and sow your seeds.
So much of gardening about warm bottoms.
Yeah, not soggy ones. And off you go, really. So I started again with this tray of Brugmansias. And I, one, two other sort of things. Somebody sent me, I don't know whether it's because of our podcast or what we were talking about it, but somebody sent me some Brassioopsis seedlings. And of course, they said a little note came with them. It said, don't worry if they look as if they're dying. They either will or they won't. And, and I thought that there's a little bit of humor in there. And they did look as if they were dying. And all the leaves that they had on them just went, ugh, and they just looked so sad. And I looked at them, this is about 2 weeks ago. I looked at them beginning of this week, and there are some two little leaves starting at the top of each one. And I think I had 5 seedlings. So I'm very pleased about that. But the interesting thing is, there's Brassioopsis, and what's the other one? There's Brassioopsis, and there's
Manihot?
Manihot. Well done. Well done. Now you are talking dirty. I love it. Brassioopsis and Manihot. They both have this palmate leaf, but with a difference. And the fingers in the palmate leaf are nipped in, if you like, halfway along, making a very, very attractive leaf. And somebody the same person sent me the seedlings. They sent me a picture of their tunnel in their garden in Cornwall, which has no frost at all, but it is exceedingly difficult to garden in, because in the summer it is very cool, very cloudy, and lots of rain. Lots of plants don't like that. But the Brassioopsis had gone through the roof of a tunnel. The polythene had split, and it had gone through the roof of the tunnel. And do you know what? You know those lovely leaves that we like that are nipped and puckered and pinched? As the plant gets older, it just gets a plain, ordinary palmate leaf. So all the fuss we're making about these junior leaves is, in actual fact, probably a waste of time. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if by cutting it, you can actually keep the juvenile leaves coming through, like you can on the eucalyptus, for instance.
Yeah.
Or I mean, time will tell, but it's interesting, isn't it?
Well, hopefully you've got some to experiment with now, so you'll be
Yeah.
able to speak as the voice of experience when it comes to Brasseopsis. I mean, the reason I know Manihot is because as a result of this podcast, I was very kindly sent one, which I did manage to keep alive for a couple of years, but then lost. So one day, as you've probably got the feeling on this podcast, and I apologise that there haven't been as many over the summer months. It's quite full on in my house. It turns out having a toddler is quite busy, and I have just had to put almost all gardening into a kind of holding pattern. So keep alive as much as I can, but I cannot sort of have visions for any planty endeavors really. Just have to manage what I can. But my
But you
dreams
know,
of the future, there will be Manihots, there will be Brasseopsis, there will be everything.
but that's what we're here for. All young parents. I mean, if they have to put, or anybody, if they for whatever reason, if they have to put things on a hold, at least they can keep in touch with what's happening in the gardening world.
Yeah. Well, this is my routine, and the radio, of course, which you can listen to every Sunday, 11 till 1. Alan Gray and assembled
But
gardening pals answering
so many
questions.
people have said to me how good it is to have the garden party back, which is lovely to hear. But I mean, and then you get what's coming next, don't you? The next comment: can you have less music, please? Well, never mind.
Oh, yes, my great endeavour to have less music and yet play the music. All I can say is I'm not playing as much as I'm supposed to. Just we'll move on before boss listens and I get sacked. You mentioned a moment ago how you do your container planting, second nature, just happens. You sent me over some photos. What we tend to sort of WhatsApp things back and forth, and this container, and we will update people on the other containers we've spoken about over the months to see how they're doing. But there was one which really knocked my socks off because it was so different. It just to me immediately said, like, Alan Gray has planted this container. No one else would do this. What did you put in it?
Well, I had let's set the scene. There's 2 benches and 4 chairs. No, there's 6 chairs actually. Sorry, 6 chairs round a table outside the teak greenhouse on a terrace. And it had some plots of house leeks on the table. And I walked past one day and I suddenly thought, my gosh, they do look dull. They look sort of as if somebody somehow put them there months. This is exactly what happened, of course. They look as if somebody had put them there months ago and forgotten them. And I suddenly thought this could do with a bit of a cheer up. So I went to onto the plant sales area and I had a look and I found there's some lovely little cyclamen there. They're not necessarily hardy ones. They weren't heterofoliums, but they're what they call patiocyclamen. I do hate that word, but there you are. I mean, that's neither here nor there. But they're what's known as patiocyclamen because they're hardier than the cyclamen persicum, the large ones. But they're not as hardy as heterofolium, which is the hardy one that we are more familiar with. Anyway, I got some of those and they had little white flowers with a fairly dark magenta pinky purple edge, and they were frilly. And there was something else from a plant from Australia, which I don't know. I've seen it before, but I don't know anything about it very much. But it was interesting. And it's called, I don't know how to even say it. I think it might be Ptilotus with a P being silent. I'm not sure, but that's how I interpret it. So there's pots of Ptilotus, and they look as if they've got soft pink bottle brush heads on them. And of course, they're not soft pink at all. They're quite hard and stiff to the touch. And they have kind of grey foliage. I was looking through a seed catalogue yesterday afternoon, and there was seed of this plant for sale. And it was amazingly expensive. It was incredibly expensive, like £5 for 10 seeds. And I thought, wonder why that is. Anyway, and so I used that. And it's a circular container. It's a copper bowl. The copper bowl is that lovely verdigris green that goes with anything. But it's kind of a turquoise green, I guess you'd say. So that looks really nice. I found an old rusty crown that I had from flower arranging days. And I put that in the middle. And inside the crown, I put a Begonia, Begonia fuchsioides, pink, which has nice arching branches and hanging racemes of little pink flowers. I put the Ptilotus around that, and I put the cyclamen as an edging, and I alternated that with some Tradescantia Maiden's Blush that I have, because I keep that as one of the That's a plant that came from my granny Gray. I mean, it was a windowsill plant, Tradescantia Maiden's blush, and you just, break bits off when you were moving things and stuck them in a glass of water and they rooted and you had another plant, and so on and so forth. But it has these lovely little pink and cream leaves with the fresh foliage, especially when it's grown in full light outside. Not so much indoors, but in full light it does outside. And I just put them together. I fluffed them up a bit like this and sort of kind of, it's like doing your hair and then putting your fingers through it so it doesn't look quite so done. So I fluffed it up a bit, gave it a jolly good watering, and there it's been since the beginning of September. And I suddenly thought, cost-wise, what does that cost me? It's probably cost me 30 quid. I mean, I had the container and all the rest, but the plants probably cost £30. And somebody's probably going to balk at that and say, oh, but just think if you spent £30 on a bunch of flowers or £50 on a bunch of dahlias, as I think you saw the other day.
I mean, I could believe it, but it felt like London prices. When you're at a tube station and there's one of these, King's Cross or whatever, you've got the people with the flowers for the, I'll say man or woman, but I think we know what I mean, who's done something and they're really sorry and going home with a sort of £70 bunch of flowers or something. We had a couple of days in North Norfolk as a little holiday. I won't bore you with all the details, but Wells, Blakeney, Clyde, marvellous. Some slightly inclement autumnal weather, but it was just so much fun. Toddler dog, having a great time. Popped into Holt, as you do if you're in that part of the world, because very practically smart. And there was a very, very charming florist there, very bang on trend with all these beautiful, clearly locally grown flowers. And I was very taken with them. Thought, well, I'm not going to buy one because we're on holiday and I'm not going to be transporting that back to my house. But how much would it cost me? £50. And it was kind of nice to see because clearly there is an appetite for those locally grown flowers, which are going to cost a bit more. But bunches, I wish I'd taken a photo, bunches of lovely dahlias and their associated friends. But yes, I was not in the market for spending £50 on a bunch of flowers. But you're right. I mean, to go back to your container, £30 seems like quite an investment, but if it is going to last you, it's certainly going to last longer than the bunch of flowers you might buy. So,
well, that container will last me from the first week of September right the way through until the end of October when the garden shuts. I mean, thereafter I don't have to worry too much about it. Although I do like things to look nice throughout the winter because Graham and I have still got to look at them, and so has anybody else that visits us. But it's not open to visitors as such. So if it lasts that length of time, I think it's a pretty good investment, 30 quid.
Worth actually drawing attention. I thought it was nice that Gardener's World featured you, I suppose, was it the beginning of September? Whenever it was. There aren't that many big glossy gardens that are open to the public through to the end of October. And also you do have the odd sort of winter opening, snowdrop opening and the like. So it's nice that for people who want to keep their garden visiting going, you're actually there. If they get inspired by Gardener's World, that you can still go.
Yes, you can. Well, yeah. I mean, this is due to the climate changing over the years that we've been gardening. It's not the garden's been open, but years ago, you probably get to now. I mean, here we are in September, and we'd already be having frosts. So the summer bedding plants would either be gathered up and taken away. And I mean, people did actually put their gardens to bed. And they put their spring bedding in and they planted their bulbs and that was it. I mean, season over. But now, of course, we have frost-free weather, often right up until nearly Christmas time. Don't mention the C word. I've seen it everywhere now. Wherever you go, there's Father Christmas is creeping his little claws into the anyway. So we have this frost-free weather. And so our garden season can last an awful lot longer, which is lovely.
Yeah. Have you at the moment, because we did have a sort of cooler week or so, which was a bit of a sudden shock to the system after all the hot weather, I assume all of your late season salvias and everything is still romping away, particularly in your nice protected corner of the world?
Yes, I mean, they are. I mean, and funnily enough, when you get to this time of the year, there are certain salvias that tend to, I think it probably more, shall I say, they're day length sensitive. So as the days become shorter and the nights become longer, they suddenly think, well, come on, let's get a move on. Otherwise we'll miss the boat kind of thing. I mean, one is salvia that I grow called Salvia involucrata Bethellii, which has lots of chaparelli shrieking pink flowers on it, shall we say. But it makes from a herbaceous perennial, it makes a bush probably nearly 6 feet tall and as much across. It's a big plant, but that's that takes probably 4 or 5 years for it to get to that size. But then once it gets there, it does. But it's plants like this that keep flowering, that do flower late. They start flowering late, but they keep flowering. So you get rid of that sort of feeling of sleaze and decay, which you have at this time of the year, because, I mean, lots of plants are dying back. But that is a really refreshing thing to have in your garden, something like that.
To go back to your containers, of course, that's something you have to fight, seeing as you are open till the end of October, and the things like petunias might start to go over. But you, with your clever little container planting, you've got other stars that step forward into the limelight while the others take a back seat.
Yeah, well, that's the general idea. I mean, there are 2 plants that have done exceptionally well with flowers for me this year. One is an Ageratum called petiolatum that I've grown for years and years and years, and it's an old variety that used to be grown for the cut flower trade, and it does pick wonderfully well and last very well in water. So if anybody's got a cut flower farm, they ought to get hold of it. It's tender, and you have to take cuttings every year, but those cuttings, because they're a new young plant, they're very vigorous, they're very they want to grow away for you, and so you can be picking it right the way through. I mean, you could still be picking it now from beginning in June, I suppose. And the other plant is Jane Ann Walton gave me a tip about Phlox drummondii. And, Phlox drummondii is a plant that Granny grew. And it's kind of things you probably wouldn't necessarily think about today. But there's one called Sugar Stars. It's not a very nice name, but it's a lovely plant. It's in varying shades of mauvey, purple, blue with white slashes on it. And each flower is slightly variable because it's seed grown. And it's one of those plants that it's a very lanky plant. It's a floppy plant. It's ideal for containers because you plant it and it just flows over the edge. And I've learned a lesson this year, which I think I've learned a lesson anyway. I was looking at the containers, and I thought, this is such a good doer. I mean, my usual doers for now is foliage, because flowers don't last as long as foliage is always there. But if I planted that in the middle of the container, around whatever the central unit is, it would then come up and come over the top, if you see what I mean, with a little bit of fluffing up from me. But we do have plants like Plectranthus argentatus with those big grey silvery leaves, and there's one called Hillhouse, which has got bright green leaves with a cream variation on it around the edge. And it's plants like those, and Helichrysum petiolatum, of course, and other Plectranthus, some of which I don't even know the name of, but somebody gave me a cutting, and the cutting became 10 cuttings, and then I used it around the edge of another container.
Of course, one of the joys about Plectranthus is they are so easy to propagate. So you can just keep them going. And it's something, particularly if you are trying to make the pennies stretch further and also have more continuity in your planting. Because I love plants, I'm always in danger of it being really dotty. I love something like a Plectranthus where you can propagate lots and it doesn't have to cost you a fortune, but you can therefore have that tying your containers together.
You can be generous with it, which means it looks ebullient.
Yeah.
And another plant like that is probably Osteospermum, isn't it? What did it used to be called? Dimorphotheca years ago. South African daisy. And that, if you have that growing in your garden, after about a couple of years, you look into the center of the plant, and each shoot has got these little adventitious roots. So they're what they call Irishman's cuttings. So you just snip one of those off, push it in the ground, give it some water, don't let it dry out, and you've got a new plant in 3 weeks that's growing away happily for you. So, that's ideal.
Yeah, love plants.
It always fascinates me that I can sell plants like that, and yet they're so easy to propagate. Why do people want to buy them? I don't understand.
Some people just haven't got the propagation urge, Alan. Not everybody is like us crazy cats on here.
They don't realise, nobody's ever probably told them. I mean, you and I remember several years ago now, we were walking through the garden here, and we found a cosmos that had broken. Do you remember the stem had broken?
Yes, yeah.
And just above that, where it had broken, I mean, it's still attached to the mother plant, but it had made adventitious roots. So those roots were going to make a new plant, and it was going to live anyway. So and Plectranthus do the same thing. So when plants are easy to root as that, you know, that's probably it's a good way to start if you want to start propagating, because you won't be too disappointed by failure.
They're all those things that I just find amazing about plants. Very exciting. That's why
I
we're
always
all
tell
here.
people, you know, always remember, I don't want to make them feel guilty if it dies, but if a plant, if you take a plant, you've got it in a container, it doesn't want to die. It wants to live. It needs to live to produce seed, to produce a next generation. So if it dies, it's probably your fault.
Don't want to make you feel bad, but it was you.
Yeah.
Now another lovely photo you sent me that we must talk about. I think for those of us who, you know, love your garden and love your planting, it's the combinations, it's the way you put things together. And I don't know how much of it is always intentional. Some of it might just happen by chance, but you sent me a really eye-catching, very sort of full of vavavoom, I suppose, an ooh la la kind of combo of Ricinus and Cosmos and Dahlias. And it was so punchy.
Yeah, they're kind of hot colors. I mean, the Ricinus is called Carmencita, and Carmencita has these fantastic red, thistly looking seed pods, but I mean, they are a bright, bright red, and they exactly match a dahlia that I've got, which came from gardening friend Fiona. And I've just propagated so much of this dahlia because it's such a good one. It's what they call a water lily dahlia, which is a double form, and it's good for everything. It's good for picking. It's good for the garden. It grows to about sort of meter tall, just over maybe a bit, meter and a bit. And I was propagating all of this, and I was writing all the labels out. And when you've got 20 labels to write out, I'm writing out Fiona's Red because I don't know the name of it, so it came from Fiona, so it's Fiona's Red. And Fiona's Red gets abbreviated F dot red. And then, oh, don't put the dot down, just put FRED. So it became Fred. And I looked at the the labels. I'm sorry, my dogs have just banded in because they've had a bath. The groom has been. No doubt. I looked at this label and I thought, oh, Fred. And this young chap came past with a baby in a pushchair, and he started to laugh. And I said, what are you laughing at? He said, well, who's Fred? And I explained that it was really Fiona's Red. He said, I think Fred's nicer. So I'm sorry, Fiona, but you have become Fred.
So in a world of cafe au laits and serenity and all of these names, I quite like Fred. No frills.
So do I. No frills, it's just Fred.
That's wonderful. Well, Fred was looking absolutely fantastic. And I must ask, I know that we can get a little bit obsessed with talking about Alan's dahlias, seed-grown dahlias at East Ruston. But I mean, with all of the mix of dahlias you've got, it's an exciting pot luck of what's going to come out. What is taking your fancy most right now of what you've selected?
Well, there's one that I particularly like. It hasn't flowered very well, but that's because it's quite young. I mean, the buds are all there waiting to open, but I've had about 4 flowers on it. It's a single with swept back petals, and it's got stripes on the petals, both on the front, inside the flower, if you like, on the back of the flower. And some of the stripes are sort of an olive green and some are bright pink. The inside of the flower opens up. When it first opens, it's kind of primrose with pink stripes on it, and they gradually deepen. So the pink deepens and the primrose deepens until it gets sort of more of a lemon than a primrose yellow. And it's just a very elegant plant because not only does it have those nice flowers, I like them, but some, you know, not everybody will because we don't all have the same taste. But it's not only the flowers, it's also the foliage because, you know, dahlia foliage, if you a straight dahlia with, you know, you just mentioned some of them, cafe au lait, for instance, it's got the most awful foliage. It's coarse, it's large, it's just horrible. But this particular dahlia has very fern-like foliage, and the leaves are very jagged, and it just makes for a whole nice looking plant. It just looks, you want to look at it, you want to know about it. But the other thing that I quite like about it is quite tall growing, and it's in a pot at the moment, and I think it would grow even taller in the garden, but it's almost as tall as me in the pot. That's including the pot, by the way. And I think for the future it could be quite stunning. But what I'll have to do now is I'll have to keep that tuber and then propagate the cuttings that first appear in the beginning of the year. And this is where the good old mist bench comes in again, because I leave these tubers in the pots, and I puts the pots on their side so they don't get too wet over the winter. And then in the spring we take the tuber out and we'll look at it. And if it's big, and I mean really big, like cramming the pot, I'll split it probably into 2 or 3. And you can do this by gently manipulating the tubers, and you'll see where there's a natural split coming. And each tuber that has a little red dot on it, that little red dot's going to be a shoot. And so we then pot them. We put them on the warm bench in the propagating house, and as they grow, we take the cuttings off. And you wait until the cuttings get to about 2 to 3 inches long, as tiny little things, and you just wiggle them backwards and forwards between finger and thumb until they come away from the mother tuber. Trim up if the bottom has got any tears on it, just trim those up, and you put them into a cell tray on the mist bench, and hopefully within 3 weeks you've got a rooted plant ready for potting.
And I feel like somewhere lurking in our back catalogue of tutorials and things, we have a video for that. If we have, I will link to it in the video version. But it's certainly a marvellous way to get new plants. It does make me think it's been a hard year for dahlias on the allotment of a mother of a toddler. All that hot weather we had, they did not like it. But I think the best performer was probably one called Jomanda, which is a sort of ball dahlia, lovely orange, exactly the sort of thing you might expect me to grow. And that, apart from the fact that I hadn't staked it very well, and so it's sort of lolloping about, that seemed to pull through neglect better than a lot of the others. Even, I mean, the singles were all right, but that as a kind of showy one, I'm going to give another thumbs up to Jomanda. It did really well. Very floriferous, regardless of ill treatment. And actually, dahlias we'll come back to in a moment for Flomo, but Hedychium trial, something that's ongoing at East Ruston Old Vicarage. Anything to report from that?
Well, we're having our next meeting here. We haven't had a proper formal meeting this year yet, because I think the RHS got in a little bit of a muddle of where people were going to be or something. The next formal meeting is going to be here on October the 3rd. And the RHS arrive here, and the judges, and they all arrive here about 10 o'clock in the morning. We sit and have a gossip for half an hour over a cup of coffee. We don't talk anything about Hedychiums at all until we get to trial ground. But we took, have you heard about so-and-so? He ran off with so-and-so, We're just the same as everybody else, And then we go up to the Hedychium trial and we walk and discuss each one. Everybody discusses. They all put their 2 pence in. And depending on how many people that turn up on the day, if it's 4 or if it's 40, however many there are on the trials committee that can make it, they come along, and it takes quite a time, because you have to consider it's just not looking at that one thinking, that's a nice one, but why is it a nice one? How long do the flowers last? What is the foliage like? Is it a good doer, as they say? Is it a vigorous plant? Is it a hardy plant? We don't know. These are all the things that we're trying to find out about the trials in the Hedychium field at the moment. But I've got one that they haven't got, in actual fact. I think I sent you a picture of it. It's called Hedychium deceptum, and it's a relatively new one. Now, I got it from that wonderful purveyor of plants that nobody else can get, and that's Nick Maser at Pan Global. This particular Hedychium came from India, where a lot of them originate from anyway, and it was found wherever. And he's been growing it for a few years, and he says that it is hardy. Now, we'll see. I've got 3 plants. They're in pots at the moment because I wanted to be able to just grow them on for a little bit and not be in too much of a hurry. And I've got plants that in pots, and I think I'll be able to divide my 3 pots and make 6 next year. And there was I must just tell you about a canna that I had, because this is a canna that people might not know. It's called Canna Brasiliensis, and it has very small flowers, but they are such piercing bright red, and they've got yellow sort of edges on them, on the bottoms of their flowers. And it was just such a wonderful find. I had 1 pot of it last year, and I divided it in spring to make 3 pots. And I thought, you've overpotted that thing, plant. I put them in too big a pots, I think. They have now filled that pot. And each of my divisions will make 4 to 5 divisions for next year. So I've gone from 1 plant to 3 plants to 15 plants. And that's a little bit like you were trying to say a little while ago. From the purchase of 1 plant, within 3 years, I've now got 15. So I've got a generous swathe to put in the garden somewhere. And it'd be nice to use them all together as a Well, it's nice in this sort of garden anyway, because it's big enough. You need sometimes to make a real stamp. One of plants, groups of one, madam, look mean. I always remember somebody saying that. And they were trying to sell this lady some plants. I said, oh no, madam. Remember, groups of one look mean.
Just never let them see my garden. Right, onwards and upwards towards the end of the podcast with a spot of FOMO. If you've never tuned in before, FOMO is that fear of missing out you get about a flower or a plant. And I had some when I went to Anglesey Abbey, so it was kind of more of a go for a walk with the family and the baby, not the dog. Sadly, I do wish I know that dogs in gardens is a sort of tricky topic, but I am a dog owner who can't go to so many gardens because I have a dog. But fortunately, she could stay at home. We went without her, had a lovely time. And dahlia season, so their sort of big dahlia crescent, I suppose you'd call it, which I did spend most of my time in dahlia garden trying to stop my little person having a tantrum. So I didn't get to spend quite as much time looking at it as I wanted, but it kind of planted according to colour. So the chocolate end sadly wasn't doing much because I did want to have a look at the chocolatey ones. But what I did get to see in real life was the Dahlia Ken's rarity, which we've heard about on this podcast. So it's not new to Talking Dirty. But I've never seen it in anything other than photos on the likes of Dan Cooper, the Frustrated Gardener's Instagram. And I've loved it. Very fluorescent, very bright pink marker penny kind of vibe going on. My kind of colours, very sunsetty shades. But I wasn't sure in real life if it would be a bit too yellowy, so I'd never planted it. Well, seeing it, it was the absolute standout of all of these different ones at Anglesey. I was very drawn in. I took many, many photos of this particular bloom, and I think I'm going to have to grow Ken's rarity, possibly at the allotment, so that I can just pick away at it and put it in. I don't know how it will work in bunches. It'll be interesting to see whether it overpowers everything else. But really, to go back to that word I used for Fiona's red, punchy. Certainly is punchy, Ken's rarity. So that is certainly on my wish list. It's hurtled higher up my wish list after seeing it at Anglesey. Where are you at with your FOMO, Mr. Gray?
Well, my FOMO, I'd quite like to get. There's a chap in New Zealand. I think he's called Dr. Ken Hammett or something similar to that. And he's a great breeder of dahlias. And I think it may be possible to get some seed from him. And I'd quite like to do that so that we got seed that's nothing to do with my dahlias in the British Isles here in little old Norfolk, but from the other side of the world, from New Zealand, which I'm lucky enough to have been there, and I did absolutely love it. It was very, very English, I have to say, but if you go to the North Island, because the geography is the other way around there, the North Island is the hotter island, and so you're closer to the equator, and it's almost subtropical in and around Auckland. It was lovely. And I remember when we got there, they were doing a huge trial of cannas, and they had these big beds of cannas in a park in Auckland. We'd never seen the like in this country, but they're here now. But then, it's a long while ago, 20 odd years ago. We hadn't seen them in this country, but it's interesting, isn't it? And xanthodias as well, the good old arum lilies in bright pinks, bright purples, amazing colours, just that little bit of difference in temperature. So I'd like to have some of Dr. Ken Hammett's seed to see what happens. It's lovely way of growing and when I save seed from my dahlias, I choose the parent that I like. And one of my favorite parents is one called Magenta Star, which is just a single dahlia that looks like a magenta star, but it has dark foliage, which is nice. And the other one that I quite often save seed from is a species dahlia called Dahlia palmeri, Dahlia Cassinia, variety palmeri, and that is close to magenta star. And my wish is that B goes from one to t'other and back again, and so we get because palmeri has lovely foliage because it's very fern-like. And I'm wondering if this cross this one that I'm liking at the moment, which is pink and primrose and yellow and dark green and it's lovely colours. I'm wondering if that's a cross and it's got a bit of Cassinia palmeri for the foliage in it. We'll see. Who knows? Maybe I'll never know. I don't care. I like it.
It did make me think when you talked about seeing these canna plantings and things for the first time. There is something about the kind of emotional side of plants and gardening, which is similar to music for me. There are certain songs, particularly ones that were released before I was born, where I think, what was it like the first time you heard Can't Buy Me Love or Help or something? And such iconic, powerful songs, or maybe Oasis, Don't Look Back in Anger, to go for a bit further down the line. And like that, when you see a plant, you really remember seeing a plant or falling in love with it for the first time, or encountering a combination or something. It really speaks to something deep within you.
You never forget it, do you? I mean, it's like I remember the Sunday that the Beatles' "Hey Jude" was released, and I was listening to Top of the Pops or whatever it was called on the radio, and they just kept playing "Hey Jude" and nothing else. And we had to wait right till the end of the program to see whether it got to number one. Of course, it had, but such was the apprehension then. We didn't dare really hope that it would, but it did. And I think probably the rest is all history, isn't it?
Jude, one of my son's middle names, incidentally, if people didn't know, which was popped in there predominantly by my partner because Fiola is such an overpowering name. He wanted to give him something simple to fall back on. And also, I have more belatedly realised, sort of also with a footballing reference, because every so often my partner, who is football mad, will say, I can't believe he's got in his name, he's got one of the generational talents of our time, Jude Bellingham, if you don't know football. So there we go. I thought it was a Beatles reference, but turns out it's probably more football. I fell for it.
Tell them what they want to hear, babe.
It's been absolutely wonderful as ever, Mr. Gray. Your garden.
Thank you very much,
for people who can still grab it, catch that Gardener's World episode on iPlayer. I mean, obviously, it just scratches the surface. There are 32 acres and 50 years worth of wonderful planting there to explore. So you only get a little snippet, but for the aerial shots alone, it is worth it. And also worth going to your website. You can get a little bit of that aerial drone work on your website.
Yeah, we did. We hired a drone, and we did when we did our website, actually, because it just gives it's another dimension. I remember the first time we ever saw an aerial shot was when somebody flew their airplane over and they took a photograph, and Graham was so ecstatic that the lines were all straight and they joined up where they should have joined up and everything, because there's always an element of uncertainty, especially when you've got me holding the pole at the other end and I keep wiggling. Will you stand still? It doesn't help.
Takes two to create all those straight lines, I think. We know.
I'll use that.
It has been absolutely wonderful as ever. The garden at East Ruston Old Vicarage is open till the end of October. So if you're lucky enough to be in that neck of the woods, or you can plan a trip to that neck of the woods, go and check out all that late season interest. Until our October special, we may convene in the middle for some other chat. But until next time, happy gardening.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hey, Theo. Alan.
Hello, Theo.
Oh, I can't hear you yet. What's happened? Is it me? Or is it you? Certain I've got my volume up and everything. It would be really embarrassing if I just had my computer muted, and that was why. Oh, actually, hang on a minute. I wonder if it might be my end. Let me just try again for me now.
Can you hear me now, Mother?
Do you know, I think it was my end. Weirdly.
I know it's your end.
Now, I realise that I haven't actually written down my flow moment. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, so I'm going to have to go and consult my phone to look up, because we went to Anglesey. He got very, very tired. I think he'd had a failed nap or something, so I spent the whole time sniffing his bacon, going like, Steve, in public, like surrounded by people. He thought it was hilarious after seeing it at Anglesey.
Oh, I thought you'd frozen then. Sorry.
That'll be a nice blooper.